The Nobel Prize laureate Dr. Martin Luther King once said, and I quote, "Our life begins to end the day we become silent about the things that matter." Unquote. You are
Oh,
here. You do really show that you are concerned about the things that really matter. And we thank you for that. And we welcome you once more. We welcome you to this three-part conversation on undoing racism. And we are honored and glad that you are engaging in this conversation with us. Karen?
Thank you, Marta Shea. It is my pleasure to introduce Marta Shea Sador. Marta Shea is a quadruple board certified psychiatrist. He has board certifications in general adult psychiatry, child and adolescent psychiatry, forensic psychiatry, and addiction psychiatry. He is also a professor of psychiatry at Columbia University School of Medicine, and he is the CEO and one of the main facilitators for the Sweet Institute. It is also my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Robert Holden. Robert is the Director of Success Intelligence and the Happiness Project. His work has been featured on Oprah and Good Morning America. He is a New York Times bestselling author for 10 books. He has spoken on TED twice. And he is, and for the last 10 years, he's hosted a weekly show on Hay House Radio called Shift Happens. So welcome to both of you.
thank you, Karen. Thank you very much for being our host and for everything you've done as well, just to make all of this this possible. And hi, Marta Shea. It's great to be with you again on this journey and on our conversation together. And Marta Shea and I think we both feel the same way, that essentially we evolve through the conversations that we dare to have in life. It's our capacity to have the conversations. Each time we can widen that capacity, each time we can be brave enough sometimes to start a conversation, or brave enough to go deeper into a conversation, and to be more open and more honest in the conversation. That's a great thing for sure. So yeah, and we thought we'd start this week with a little sort of centering practice. And to help us with the practice, I'm going to share a poem with you called Human Family by Maya Angelou. I was fortunate enough to interview Maya Angelou 3 times. And on all 3 occasions, I felt I was in the presence of someone who had somehow managed to have her mind be transformed into love, quite frankly. It was a blessing to be in her presence each time. So this is Maya Angelou, and it's called Human Family. Like a lot of poems, one of the reasons why I love poems so much is that they get to the point really, really quick. But also, good poems are meditations, and they're also calls to action. So this is Human Family, Maya Angelou. I note the obvious differences in the human family. Some of us are serious, some thrive on comedy. Some declare their lives are lived as true profundity, and others claim they really live the real reality. The variety of our skin tones can confuse, bemuse, delight, brown and pink and beige and purple, tan and blue and white. I've sailed upon the 7 seas and stopped in every land. I've seen the wonders of the world, not yet one common man. I know 10,000 women called Jane and Mary Jane, but I've not seen any 2 who really were the same. Mirror twins are different, although their features jibe, and lovers think quite different thoughts while lying side by side. We love and lose in China, we weep on England's moors, and laugh and moan in Guinea, and thrive on Spanish shores. We seek success in Finland, are born and die in Maine. In minor ways we differ, in major we're the same. I note the obvious differences between each sort and type, but we are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike.
Robert, thank you. Thank you very much. Robert will soon go ahead and walk with us to an overview of what is going to take place today for our second part of the interview. But before he does that, I am going to go ahead and walk with us through a quick review on where we've been in this conversation so far. And to ensure that this review be as engaging as possible, we are going to use both the Socratic questioning, the Socratic method, and the collective learning so that all of us can make the best out of it. We studied with 4 aims plus 1, a quadruple aim plus 1. The first aim was for all of us to recognize the fact that there are effects of this phenomenon of racism. Racism has its effects. And so second aim, we said, we've agreed that we do care. We may have not shown in the same way, at the same intensity or level. We may be responding to that sense of caring different way, but it's been shown that given who we are, as part of who we are, the nature of who we are, part of us really cares about this phenomenon of racism. That was the second aim. And now we went ahead and talked about the third aim, which is, the question is, how have we been responding? How do we respond? And what's that response been like? In order to make sure that all of us are fully engaged in this conversation, we would like to pause for a while in this review and ask everyone who, I don't know, want to share very quickly, either verbally on the chat with us, how would you say you've been responding to this phenomenon? Whoever, 1 or 2 people who want to quickly share. How have you been responding to this phenomenon of racism? And that may also be an inquiry we'll hold in our head as we move forward. And the fourth aim has been, as we respond, how do we make sure that we actually balance the learning of what's going on in terms of the response, but also with some reflections. So the use of inquiry, exploring where we are, what outcomes we have been seeing, and what adjustment we think may need to be done, and based on what. That's the fourth aim. And that's very important because we started last week with the quote of, learning without reflecting is in vain, while reflecting without learning can be very dangerous. And how do we ensure that as we are responding, we balance that? This is the reason why, one of the reasons why you had a couple of inquiries at the end of last week, in order for all of us to think, to explore throughout the week until today. Now, we would like to thank many of you who have been responding to the inquiry, which is the inquiry of how have you been responding to racism, to the phenomenon of racism? What kind of responses have you been having? So we have some answers here, Robert. So Heidi says, involved in Black Lives Matter. Nancy says, frustration. Deborah says, trying to stop and listen and hear what people are saying. Very hard, isn't it, Deborah? All right, very hard. And thank you for sharing that. Mitchell says, been sitting on the DEI committee and trying to really educate himself. Ruth talking about recognizing how much more need to be done and we need to feel and know. Julia, compassion. So we have many very great answers here. Thank you for that. We have a lot of wonderful answers. And this is an inquiry that will continue. And as part of the ultimate aim, we said with a part of the review is what type of thinking may we need in order for us to get to the root of racism and undo it. And for us to actually move on, let's take a step back and ask whatever responses we have been witnessing so far, what types of outcomes have we been having? So we've gone that, and as part of the ultimate aim, we talked about the 5-step solution, a problem solving process model. So we talked about the fact that number one, we need to identify the problem. So we said that. And we've all agreed that the problem indeed really happens to not be racism for a variety of reasons. Now, racism, ism is a suffix, a Greek word, suffix. This is a system based on race, and race we've identified with Robert and the conversation that is actually has been made up. There is no genetic evidence to say that there is such thing as race. In fact, many of us know that, let's say we have a group of African Americans, right? And within them, there are many more differences within a group of African American, for example, than between the group of African American and a group of Irish, for example, and vice versa. You go to Africa, you find many more differences within the group of Africans than if you have differences between a group of Africans and a group of Australians, for example. So it's clear the evidence is there. And then the question would be, then why do we have the effects? So because indeed we've agreed that it's not the problem, it doesn't mean there are not effects of that same symptom of it. So when we have a fever, the fever may cause convulsions in the children, but the convulsions being the effect of the fever, but the fever is not the problem. There is an underlying problem of that fever. So we've agreed, and we've agreed that we need to define the problem, and we've agreed that we've not been able to even agree on the problem because of that, because indeed we have not really been identified what the problem really is. And step 4 and step 5 really has been about the what's the cause of the problem and what's the root of the root cause of it. And part of the inquiries that you had throughout the week was, what do you think are the causes of racism? Just like you did just now, in response to the question of how have you been responding to racism, we would like to see how many of you would feel like volunteering to also tell us what's been some of your responses to the inquiry of what have been the causes of racism? What do you think? What do you think are the causes of racism? So you can also use the chat box, Willie, and let us know what you found in your exploration. And we actually have also been able to see racism from different perspectives. Last week with Robert, we saw how Martin Luther King formulated it, how Eric Fromm formulated it, Einstein formulated it. So that's how we got, yes, last week with those two inquiries specifically that we have, we're still exploring. And with that, we can say we're ready to move on to the next step, not really forgetting what we've been doing so far, but really bringing them all together. Robert?
Thank you, Marta Shea. So, yeah, it's really thought-provoking, isn't it? Just to take some time over, what we've looked at so far. And thank you. Yeah, we look at some of these sort of underlying causes of what's really going on here. And I'm just taking this in, the news, certain news channels. Thank you, Heidi. Yeah, for sure. It's, yeah, really, just very big. Separation definitely was one of our big themes, wasn't it, last week? Just exploring separation for sure. Thank you, Marta Shea, just for like a great sort of like getting us up to speed, I think, with, with the conversation and what we've been thinking about so far. So it feels really good to do that. We also mentioned, didn't we? Well, we mentioned just at the end of of our first conversation, this point about like the part that we'd like to play in undoing racism. Yeah, so we'll keep that nice and open for now. What is that part that we'd like to play? I think that would be great. And then also, I mean, to this week, I think one of the things that I want to float as an idea is let's imagine we could end racism in one generation. Let's imagine that. Let's just imagine a world in which racism really was ended in one generation. And my intellect has no idea how that would happen, but nonetheless, I think there's a very special place for imagination in our lives. In the history of thinking, especially if you go back before the Enlightenment era, which is strangely named, by the way. I don't know about you, but when I first started to learn about the Enlightenment era, I thought that must mean it was when everybody got enlightened. But of course, actually, it was the name given really to a new phase of thinking, which was really dominated by the intellect and reason and science, which is obviously a fine thing. But before all of that, there was this thing called imagination. And imagination was considered by many to be the key to a higher form of thinking and a higher way of living. So I think, just to imagine for a moment, what would it be like to be the generation that ends racism? I think is a really lovely invitation. And I think in some ways that's partly been my motivation to wanting to have this conversation with you, Marta Shea, and then to share it with everybody else. Yeah, let's be part of that generation. Let's be part of the generation where each and every one of us plays our part somehow. Martin Luther King, for me, when I read about his life, the thing that really strikes me so much is that he somehow he put himself into the most impossible situation. So for instance, he made a point of living in the slums with his family in Chicago. He made a point of living in the most economically deprived places that he could. So like he went right to the place where there was no hope. And somehow he had this resilience about him where he met this sense of hopelessness with hope. Now, I think it's pretty clear to understand how he did that because he was spirit-led. So, he was following a Christ path and he was letting himself be inspired spiritually in order to handle a problem, which we're going to see this week, actually isn't biological, it's psychological. So he was meeting psychology with spirituality. And for him, he saw, you know, that this is the great, really the solution every time, is somehow we have to meet our psychology with a higher mind, a higher way of thinking. What some people like to call sometimes possibility thinking, not positive thinking, possibility thinking. I like the difference, by the way, between the two. Positive thinking is, I know, is well-intentioned, but sometimes positive thinking doesn't allow for the feelings of hopelessness. You know, I don't know about you, Marta Shea, but I think a lot of times in my work, I've often had to wean people off positive thinking so that they could be more honest. And then by being more honest, they could heal. And then they could be positive later. But they were being so positive up front, you know, and you know, that actually this was holding them back. And but so positive thinking is great, but possibility thinking, that's different. And in particular, if I could just go to the spiritual for a moment, but possibility thinking would be, the Buddhists would talk about thinking with the big mind, like going from Sema to Rigpa, small mind to big mind. And each tradition has its way of doing this. But there's this idea that there is a, like for instance in Christianity, Holy Spirit is universal inspiration. I'm going to plug into universal inspiration and just see if there's another way of thinking about this, and have my psychology be met through imagination by some great spirituality. So this week, we want to look at a bit more brainstorming, but we also want to look at racism and associated beliefs. What is the psychology that's contributing to racism? If there is no biological basis for racism, which we know to be true, you know, there are 4 main blood groups on the planet, and they are evenly distributed across all of us everywhere. There's nothing different in our DNA. We've tried so hard to find the differences and they're just not there. We've studied skull size. You know, there was a theory for a while, wasn't there, that like the brain was different inside different people, and it's nope, sorry, not that. DNA, nope, sorry, it's not that. Well, it must be in the blood then. Nope, sorry, it's not there. It's just not there. Biologically, as you pointed out, Marta Shea, and as all the science points out, we really just, we're a diverse bunch for sure, but it all is wrapped up in the sameness of each other almost. So it has to be psychological. So we're going to address some of those beliefs, and then we're also going to address unconscious bias today. We're going to get into some unconscious bias and see if we can open our eyes a little wider than ever before, so as to meet this great challenge of ending racism in a generation in our lives. Yeah. How's that sound, Marta Shea?
Thank you, Robert. That's perfect, because it we saw, like, there is a text here I'm looking where Carrie said, if racism ended tomorrow, would we not still find ourselves looking at other forms of oppression? And that's exactly what Robert is alluding to. That's exactly what this part is going to help us really fully understand. So right on print, Robert, for where we're going right now. And so I would therefore start by looking at, if we all agree that indeed racism, which is based on the race, which is a social construct which definitely we made up, and everybody would again be asking, but we still have an effect. Yes, there are effects. And yes, what is that? Racism being a symptom and being a belief. So how do beliefs work? Like Robert says, this is psychology. This is purely psychology. There's no biology. So we need to really get into the nitty gritty here. So racism is a belief. So really, we go to many places. We do people do believe in that sense of that idea of like a superiority based on some physical features, right? And now, which also means there are associated beliefs to that belief. Why? Because this is exactly how our psychology works. It works through association. In fact, our brain is wired that way. The moment I say one word, right away you're ready to tell me another word. That's how the brain works. The moment I have one thought, my brain is already ready for the next thought. The moment I have a belief or I'm behaving according to one belief, it also means right there are some forms of associations. So which also mean it's clear, like Robert says, there's a number of beliefs associated with the belief of racism, which means if we are raising ourselves to that great possibility thinking that Robert alluded to say, what if we decide, are determined, are committed to be part of this generation that end racism? And we can be part of that, just like Robert says, imagination, says Einstein, is more important than knowledge. And it indeed that is correct. So, but it also means we need to explore and look at what are the different things we need to pay attention to. So one of them, therefore, are the related beliefs. And I'm gonna be talking about that belief of superiority that actually was coined by Alfred Adler, a psychiatrist and neurologist, who actually says there is no place you have a sense of superiority where there is not a sense of inferiority. I repeat, wherever there is a sense of superiority, it means there is a sense of inferiority. So therefore, which takes us to the following question: what is the relationship then between the sense of superiority, belief of inferiority, and racism? And everybody can start to think about the answer in their head, but it's clear that there is a very close link, which means we are unable to address racism without addressing our own sense of superiority or our own sense of inferiority for that matter. But the invitation is very great because this is an invitation that all of us, regardless of which side we think we belong to, can really rise to, can participate. And this is why this is the first of the different series of beliefs that we are looking at today. Very nice place to go on to the next belief, Robert. You're on mute.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
The next belief that we want to is really to revisit. It's the belief of separation. And you know, I was just having a chat with Karen just before we got going today, and you know, I was sharing with her that I think, you know, in some ways, if there is a form of racism on the planet that needs to be addressed, that we could still talk about even more, it's that we are overly identified with being human, to the point that we actually see ourselves as some sort of distinct race from nature.
Mm.
And in thinking of ourselves as distinct from nature, you know, I think that causes us great harm in itself. And if we look at what we do and have done with nature, I mean, you know, we just look around. I mean, we are, you know, we are killing and causing great harm to many, many other species of life on this planet, each and every day. And we're doing that. When we do this, why I think this is significant is because whatever we do to the other, we will do to ourselves. Okay? Whatever we do to the other, we will do to ourselves. Have a little look just even in history and look at the country that's gone to war the most, and you will find the most civil wars there too. So the country that goes to war with everybody else goes to war with itself. Like, we have to really pay attention to what's happening here is this sense, the moment we think we're separate from each other, it is not a peaceful situation. It does seem to end in some sort of war, some sort of conflict. And in the separation as well, there's something that happens. It's a sort of a schizoid thing, really, but we stop feeling. We actually stop feeling. And we stop feeling for the animals that we're killing. We stop feeling for all of the insects that are becoming extinct at the moment. We stop feeling for the forests, and we stop feeling for the Mother Earth. And in a way, I think, once we get that separate, we stop feeling for each other. And because we stop feeling for each other, like our circle of feeling starts to shrink so that we eventually only feel something for a few people. And even then, those few people, we'll call it the family, we then have a fight with each other in the family. And we know, and on it goes. There's like, it's this, so this sense of separateness is something that we really, really have to address. And I think on some level, it starts with trying to identify with life even more than with being a human. Like we have been created by life. We are part of life. We're part of something far bigger than humans. It's hard to get our head around this for sure, and it messes with religions when we do try to do this, doesn't it? It's like when we stop thinking for a minute that God is a man in the sky. I'm not sure roses are thinking God is a man in the sky. I'm not thinking oak trees are thinking God's a man in the sky. I think there's a God. I think there's creation. And I think we are part of it. We're an expression of it. But it does feel to me like somehow we've got to widen our sense of self. We've got to widen our circle of love to somehow include the whole lot, not just humans. Growing up, I remember, when I was introduced to the story of Dr. Dolittle, who could talk to all the animals, I remember feeling this profound sense of envy and I remember, like, as a young boy, I'd go out into the garden and try to talk to the blackbird, and the blackbird would fly away, or I'd try to talk to the butterfly, but the butterfly wouldn't stay. And I felt like a lot of pain around that, actually. Like, why are they scared of us? Or why don't they want to land on our hands? And for any of us, when a butterfly has landed on our hands, it's a great privilege, I think. It's a great feeling of thank you so much. Thank you so much for landing on my hand. Thank you so much for not being scared of me. Here's a moment where we just get to be one together. There's a oneness right now between me and the butterfly, or me and the blackbird, or whatever it is. Anyway, I hope you get the feeling for what I'm trying to convey here, which is I think we have to start with a sense of oneness with life, and to somehow get the hang that diversity is a lot more diverse than we're letting on. It's about finding a way to be able to stand next to a tree and have a moment together. It's about being able to do these things. Once a year, we go swimming in the wild with the whales and the dolphins. It's a pilgrimage we take, and it's just off the coast of Africa. And we're swimming the wild with these pilot whales and with these dolphins. And we've been doing this for 10 years or so. And it's a beautiful experience because there is this feeling of the oneness that exists with all creatures everywhere. When I look into the eye of a whale, and we're swimming like this close, it's pretty major. We're swimming this close, and when I look into the whale, into the eye of a whale, I have to tell you, I stop feeling like a human. I feel and it's like, and when I look into the eye of a whale as well, I feel something profoundly intelligent. And they don't feel like a whale anymore. I don't feel like a human anymore, but we do both feel like friends, like we're part of the same thing. Yeah. So I'm starting with the sense of like, there's a oneness that I think it's spiritual, it's biological. We are all made of stuff, you know. Carl Sagan said, this great thing. He said, if you want to make an apple pie, you have to start with a universe. Literally, if you want to make an apple pie, you've got to start with a universe. You can't make an apple pie without the whole help of the universe. And that would be the same for whales, and it would be the same for humans. And we have to find a way to enjoy the sense that there is a sameness here. We're not as separate as we sense ourselves to be. That doesn't mean there isn't diversity. There is, but it's something not to be afraid of. It's something to embrace somehow. And yeah, but it's the belief that we're separate from each other, it's a violent belief. And we know it's violent because if humans didn't feel separate from nature, we wouldn't have done what we've done to the planet already. If humans didn't feel separate from other species, we wouldn't be killing them off at the rate that we are killing them off. And if humans didn't feel separate from each other, there wouldn't be these acts of racism and slavery and segregation and every other form of separation that we've seen up to this point. So imagine for a minute, imagine what it would be like to experience the oneness. I mean, truly to experience the oneness with everybody. Imagine what it would be like to experience the oneness with the sky, oneness with nature, oneness with all the animals, oneness with each other. That's what we sort of need to get to. And then within that, there can be diversity for sure, but the diversity is an expression of the oneness. All right, where do we go next, Marta Shea?
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Thank you. And you have spoken so eloquently about this. I would like to make sure that I wonder what people are hearing here when I'm really talking about such an important, crucial concept of separation. And I wonder whether people may think that this conversation is through one lens, because I really want to bring something here. Einstein himself, and as actually I have cited last week, actually you cited last week, Robert, says a human being is part of the whole, yet he experiences himself, his thoughts, his feelings, as if he were totally separate from the rest. And he called that a kind of an optical delusion. As you said earlier, Robert, it's a psychological problem. And Einstein, being obviously the best scientist of the 21st century, really has been able to help us make sense of that problem, about that belief of separation. And in other words, from a scientific standpoint, we know that what you are talking about is just what it is, that we really are not separate, we really are one. And I wanted to bring that up to really make sure that all of us, we are clear on the fact that it doesn't matter which of the five major system of thought that we actually look at, it really is. We are one. So whether we are looking at science or whether we're looking at metaphysics or spirituality or religion or philosophy, this is really the intersection of all those systems of thought really agree on this very powerful concept that you just elaborated on. And I really wanted to make sure that everybody is hearing that, regardless of which camp you are at. So, and now which takes us to our related beliefs. Obviously, all of those are related beliefs, and this is the defense based. Defense based. Well, if actually we are separated, then right, and then I need to really now to defend myself, and that's why that's the big relationship. But then Sigmund Freud, who studied psychoanalysis itself actually that came from the law of thermodynamics. So it's physics based, based on the laws of physics, and where we know that in a system, right? Just like the Lavoisier law, nothing is really created at unknown, nothing is really lost, everything is just transferred. Now, if I have a series of thinking, of thoughts, of beliefs that are incompatible with our nature, with who we really are, then there needs to be a way for me to deal with that. And that's what Sigmund Freud has been able to help us understand through what we call the defense mechanism. And which also means all of us with no exception, we are living a life with a number of defenses. And many of those defenses are related to the beliefs that are associated with the phenomenon of racism, with the belief of racism, which means it's very, very hard for us to imagine undoing racism without looking at those that type of belief, that defense based, which means as we are participating, as we are responding, we need to pay attention to that belief in ourselves, but also in the group that we are really working with in terms of whether education, whether listening to, or whether paying attention. Now, Sigmund Freud talked very well about how that get translated, that whole defense base is through the phenomenon of projection. It is projection, and we all know that. Again, same thing, science and physics and all those really agreed on. This is the whole word of projection. And because of that, I do believe that as we are talking about racism, this is exactly why I like when when Kerry made the point on what would happen, let's say racism was not there, what about all the other things? Indeed, because that's why we are unable to address one isolated thing without looking at the whole group of what's going on. And this is why we do want to make sure that everybody understands this is a conversation where no one is interested in taking a side, because the moment we are taking side, then we are part of the whole problem that started the whole phenomenon to start with. But unfortunately, this is what makes it sensational out there. So which side we are in? So it's the whole defense-based mechanism, projection-based mechanism. And this is an invitation for all of us as we continue on that conversation, as we continue in this possibility thinking, to look at those defense-based beliefs that really will continue to foster racism. And if we really want to undo racism, we need to really work around them as well. Robert?
Thank you. There's a lot to take in here, isn't there? But once again, let's just get this feeling for, I think racism is asking us to address our psychology. It's asking us to address what we believe. It's asking us to address the origin of these beliefs. It's actually really asking us to address how we think. Yeah, clearly our thinking has created racism. So we really need to address how we're thinking. One of the questions I sometimes ask on my Success Intelligence course is, who taught you how to think? Yeah, it's a pretty important question. Not many of us will have had a class at school on how to think. Yeah, and yet we will have had teachers and we will have had role models and influencers teaching us how to think the whole time. Yeah, and we've started with Adler and sort of the sense of inferiority and superiority, and then we've moved into sort of separation and defense-based thinking, and really at the root of all of this is fear, some sense of fear, and recognizing how much of my thoughts, this would be a good question really, is the thought I'm currently thinking influenced by fear or by love? Or another way of saying it would be, is this thought that I'm thinking right now influenced by fear or truth? Yeah. Now, the moment we take on the thought of separation, it's actually then very easy to feel afraid. Whatever you feel separate from, you're probably going to feel afraid of. So, you know, these are very, very related to each other. But I want to share something that Nelson Mandela said, which is, no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, then they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. So this fear, for the most part, fear is learned. Yeah, we learn it. I remember my family and I were in Northern Ireland for a while, and it was during the time of what was called the Troubles, which is a very Irish way of playing down what was actually a very, very scary time for a lot of us. And we lived in Belfast, and you know, there was the Troubles existed, and they were between, you know, the Protestants and the Catholics, and there was a sense of separation, all taking place, by the way, within the same religion. I mean, it really, I mean, it couldn't be more crazy. Anyway, I was about 5 years old at the time, and I was in hospital for an eye operation. Had a lazy eye, and I made friends with the boy next to me who had a similar situation with his eye. And whilst we were in hospital, some bombs went off, and all of a sudden the whole hospital was basically, there was no access to the hospital. So it meant mum and dad couldn't get me, and I was going to spend another night in hospital, and I did. But the bombs kept going off. And each time the bombs went off, my friend next to me, in the bed next to me, would say, every time he ever heard a bomb, it was bloody English pigs. Bloody English pigs. Okay, it's 4 years old, 5 years old, bloody English pigs. And sometimes it wasn't a bomb. Sometimes, I remember one occasion, it was just somebody dropped a plate. Bloody English pigs, just like that. And it's funny how some things stick with you, isn't it? But I just remember like going, wow, bloody English pigs. And I really I had to ask mum and dad all about it afterwards. What did he mean by that, I wonder? That's not natural though, is it? It's not natural, it's learned. It's learned. And I guess what we have to do in this sort of work is try and find out, you know, in our own psychology, which of our thoughts are, if you like, unconditioned thoughts, natural thoughts, and which of our thoughts are learned thoughts, thoughts that we have learned to think, not least because some sort of bias, perhaps, that we have inherited. Yeah. So that's another one, just fear, the effect of fear.
And thank you, Robert. And we would like to see what everybody is hearing so far. We have a few additional beliefs to talk about. But what are people hearing? We've talked so far about sense of superiority, sense of inferiority, sense of separation, projection, right, defense based, and then Robert just talked about fear. What is everybody hearing, and how do you and as you're hearing that, how do you see that, right, in relationship with that whole phenomenon of racism, which is indeed another belief. And again,
Mm.
as we all know that, as we all know that our whole psychology being based on belief drives everything else, right? We all know that. So we have the normal blueprint in our brain, the unconscious brain, the same part of the unconscious mind, the same part of our mind that allows us to breathe while talking without effort. Our heart continues to beat, right? That's the really part of the unconscious mind that does that. It also allows our belief system to drive our behaviors automatically. We don't have to,
Mm.
the moment those beliefs are incorporated into our psyche, that's set. So they
Mm.
drive everything. That's our behaviors. Therefore, we are curious to hear how are we hearing this? Because the same way our belief of separation just drives everything we do, the same way our belief of fear, right? This is fear-based defense drive everything, is the same way that our belief in racism just drives how we see ourselves, how we look at other people, how we actually really relate to others. And this is part
Yeah.
of the of the conversation we want to make sure that everyone at least is having with us and with them as well, because so that we can move that up, really to really be part of that generation, as Robert says, that can really do something and undo racism. And now,
Mm.
and one additional belief, as you continue that thinking, as you continue, as we move forward, is the otherness. Now, the otherness is related to the sense of separation, but as you can see, every single belief that we have been talking about so far, they're all related.
Mm.
And it's very interesting. It's very interesting because it's clear in science on how, indeed, just like Lavoisier law, nothing is created, nothing is really lost. It's really everything is transformed. So it's transforming in different forms of the same. And it just does how this is the so the whole psychology gives us all of those different types of beliefs. And the otherness, which is related to the sense of separation, but it's really a little bit more concrete, more individualized, and just like Robert talked about, even within a couple, right? Even within your family, even with parents and children, even with our best friends, it doesn't matter. There is that otherness. And if we are, and all of you, I know you are very into looking at racism and undoing racism, can we not not look at that belief of otherness? So who am I, in relationship with others, right? And what how do I behave in such a way that that belief is really not running me? And this is a
Mm.
very more important of a question than it may sound, because it's been shown that it may be harder to start looking at a belief by touching the belief itself, but it may become easier to actually start shaping a belief by shaping the behaviors that you would want. So we call that in neuroscience the process of substitution. So what type of belief, what type of behaviors, how am I being that actually will help me be or overcome that sense of otherness, which is related to all those other beliefs. So fear, defense, separation, and of course, sense of superiority and inferiority. So that's actually a very nice, concrete way to talk about otherness because it touches upon the other beliefs. I think we can continue to on the next one, Robert. Um,
Yeah, I mean the otherness has so many implications to it, doesn't it? And it's again, it's like the moment we think we're separate, everything else becomes another, isn't
mhm,
it? You know, it's like and even, you know, even we relate to God in that way. God is the other.
mhm,
It's not that we are an expression of God anymore. It's that it's me and God.
mhm.
I mean, it's that profound, this sense of otherness, you know, in as opposed to the usness, you know. Um, do you remember the boxer Muhammad Ali? Um, Muhammad Ali, do you remember him? Kind of a couple of nods. Anybody remember Muhammad Ali? Great boxer. He he was in his spare time, he was a poet, and he came up with the he said the shortest poem in the English language. He delivered it with great style. I wouldn't be able to do it the way he did it, but the shortest poem in the English language is me, we. And then he just left it at that, you know, me, we. And that's everything you need to know right there. Me, we. That's what it really means to be a human being. Yeah. So interesting to think of it like that. But that's the otherness bit, isn't it? But where there's othering, and we start to create the separation, then we will create something that's called hierarchical ranking. So we'll create hierarchies. And one of the hierarchies is we're down here and God's up there. So there's one hierarchy for you right away. Yeah. There's an upper, you know, if you think about spirituality for a moment. So spirituality so often is about, you know, the kingdom of heaven up there. There's a higher power up there. There's a need to ascend up there. So you get this sense, it's really ingrained in us that we're down here and there's something better up there. And once we start to think of that spiritually, you know, then we can't help but do something to ourselves where, for example, even in our own bodies, think about this, even in our own bodies, we stay up here because this is called thinking, but we get a bit worried the more we descend into our body. I mean, we get really worried around the heart. Yeah. We get even more worried around the genitals. I mean, you know, this is like, we're now really descending into the world, you know, and this is all, it's like, it just starts to get crazier and crazier because we've got this whole thing going on about up and down. And it's not just up and down, it's about good and bad. And it's about better and worse. So now we're dividing the whole world up into good and bad and better and worse and superior and inferior. You know, what a mess. What a mess. But it is what we've done to ourselves. And if we're doing it to ourselves, we will do it to the other, and we're going to do it to everybody else. I think one of the most brilliant definitions of racism I've ever come across is that racism is the myth of inferior people. Yeah. Racism is the myth of inferior people. We haven't done it just, you know, to us in that way. We've also done it with gender, haven't we? Think how long we've done that for. Yeah. So it's this is, you know, I think one of the things when Marta Shea and I wanted to do this, we really wanted to say, look, we do want to be part of this generation that ends racism forever. But if we're going to do this, we do need to spend that 55 minutes in the hour addressing the problem before we get to the solution. And we are going, you know, I hope this is all right for you all, but we're trying to be really thorough here by really, really doing, this is not a 3-minute interview. You know, this isn't a quick fix in that sense. But actually, I think we'll get to the solution faster and the genuine solution, if we can just, you know, sort of spend some time in our murky psychology and understand that actually this is our psychology that's driving all of this, and that we can transform our psychology. But I think I can leave it enough there just to say, look, it's the moment there's others and there's separation, there is going to be this hierarchical thinking, and we're going to place some people, you know, at the top of the pile and others at the bottom of the pile, and we've done it for the history of humanity.
Thank you, Robert. And this is correct. And as you're saying that, I'm reading Cowling's great contribution, saying, I'm hearing that when we feel different, we feel we need to find ways to prove our belief. And this is totally correct and scientifically sound, because again, the brain works just like that. One associated to the next, associated to the next, and then you can say, yes, it never stops until we take a step back and look at the root of it. Otherwise, we may be trying to solve one associated effect, which we confuse as the problem, but it's gonna create more problem, because again, as you said, Caroline, we are being forced to really go ahead and look and then really reinforce beliefs to prove our root belief of where the problem is. So which takes us to one way we do that, which is segregation. Segregation. I remember when I lived in Boston, I used to be very much involved in organized medicine at that time. In fact, I was on the board of trustees of the American Psychiatric Association, and then actually I had a lot of leadership where people would come and talk to me, and each time they heard that, so they would have a lot of physicians who were assigned a dark skin color. When they talk to me, they tell me, you are in Boston and you're telling me you love it, and because because so because what happened is that so you want to go to Boston because that's you want to go to the small school. We start with H, but then just study and then get yourself back to wherever you were, because then what happened is that they show that many people maybe in Boston, they say that this is so segregated, but then so one thing for sure is that what has been shown is all of us, as we go with the belief that yes, it's segregated, and because it's segregated, I better just know where I belong and not try to integrate. This is where I belong. So in other words, all of us with the belief that this is a segregated place, even if you get accepted there, okay, just go there, try to find where you belong and don't do anything. And that has perpetuated over and over. And you really, I remember I remember I used to actually be responsible for a lot of medical students at the medical school there, and there was that same idea. So the idea of segregation, again, we made it real. It looks totally real as a belief, the same way we have so many of those other beliefs will. But then when are we going to look at it from the perspective that we actually not only made it real, that belief, we reinforce it every day through our behavior. And again, can we undo racism without looking at this belief of segregation, which many times is just not based on race? Everybody would agree that you may have segregation based on based on age, or based on or really gender, and all of those things based on cultural beliefs. You see that, and can we actually a family makeup or whatever it is? Therefore, that idea of segregation, that belief of segregation, we ought to also look at it. In other words, the best way, the way we're going with that conversation is to look at how we made up one problem. And in other words, even when we say, okay, let's say we go away with racism, we're still gonna have other belief systems that likely will bring something else, because many of them, the others, they are different forms of the same. But I think this is just ways for us to again, as we move forward, learn and reflect, balance the inquiry with how we are solving this so that we really can get this correctly. And just like you cited, MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., Robert, I believe that this would be really fulfilling the dream of Dr. King. And I think all of us would
Yeah.
like to be part of this. On to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's more to go. I mean, there are many, many more associated beliefs here that we could focus on, but I'm feeling like we could maybe pause here for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And we've put down the case for the fact that again, it's not biological. There's a social construct here. This is psychological. It's man-made, so to speak. And that, frankly, if we were to attempt to end racism without addressing this this psychology, then very quickly the next problem would come up in its place. And 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 within in the scheme of things, one of the greater problems is simply, even, frankly, how many more years have we got left on this planet? Yeah. So there's a lot at stake here, but maybe we could just pause for a moment here. And I'm also just having a look in the chat. It's so rich. But and I wonder if anybody would like to speak to us now, rather than just to type in some bits and pieces. Just any thought, any comments that you have around your relationship to your own psychology.
Mm-hmm.
What you've had to do with your own thinking,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to really engage in this challenge, in the way that you have. And I think it would be really nice just to hear if anybody would like to speak into the group about that, please.
Yeah, indeed.
It would be most welcome.
And we do appreciate all those great comments on the chat box.
Yeah,
As well.
no, they're really cool, but I think it'd be nice to hear get some volume now. Let's hear from somebody, please. So don't hold back. Come on board, and let's chat.
Say something.
I'll say something.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Blair. Thank you.
Hi. Hi, everyone, and thanks so much. I missed session 1 of the Undoing Racism series, so I'm really glad to join this, and this has been a really valuable seminar so far. I've just been thinking about my own psychology. I've been reading a lot of books, engaging in a lot of difficult conversations, attending seminars and talks, and I've just been having a more, I think, honest examination of my own biases, even outside of race, even though this conversation is very much localized in race. But I've been seeing the way, that these unexamined biases really do contribute to that separation you were describing, and in a broader sense about us in the world. And yeah, I don't know. I've been finding it all very challenging. I engaged in a challenging discussion last night that didn't go well, and I can feel very defeated by these attempts to engage, and then I find myself feeling like I just don't know where to begin. That I haven't been very effective in my approach, I think. So, I'm looking to cultivate as many tools as I can right now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Gosh, as you speak, I just recognize a lot of those feelings are just how I've felt, along the way and continue to feel along the way. I'm absolutely. I wonder if I could just ask you, like, can you get in touch just with what is it that even makes you want to do this inquiry? Just for a moment, let's just touch base with that. Why not just keep your head in the sand? Like, what is it that you're responding to that makes you want to give a go at this incredibly difficult and fraught thing that we're trying to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm responding, like many people, to this very intense, very troubling division that we're seeing in our nation right now, and just sort of a disbelief at where we're at, that we don't seem to be at all on the same page with the movement like Black Lives Matter or other kinds of social policies that positively impact people, Americans, if we're talking about domestic policies, that things that would benefit us as a nation, but are seen as being, social welfare programs that are targeted for groups of people who want something for nothing, or little sound bites that I keep hearing, that are agitating a lot of discomfort in me. And I'm thinking about, like, how did we arrive here, and how can we bridge that gap, and how can I be effective in having conversations that facilitate that? And I don't have a lot of answers, but I am responding to where we're at as a nation and the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Blair. Because, I feel what's so important is, I know we're educated to try to be effective and at least to seem to be effective. You think of our education system, most of us, we're meant to, by the time we leave school at 16, we're meant to know what the purpose of our life is, what career we want, where we're heading, what we're going to do. I mean, there's a hell of a pressure to be effective in the world. And, most of us, we're still, we're working it out in our 20s. Then we realize we're still working it out in our 30s. Then we realize we're still working it out in our 40s, then for me, I'm working it out in my 50s, we're working it out as we go. But I'm just wanted just to point to, like, we can maybe leave the answers alone for a while, but just get in touch with that motivation that wants you to engage in this. That's what I'd say, Blair. There's a goodness in there. There's a goodness in that motivation. There's a wisdom in that motivation. I'm going to say, like, there's a love in there. There's something in there that's saying there's a better way and I can be part of it. The frustration, the awkwardness is that I don't think the answers come necessarily right away, but there's something about staying true to that impulse that's saying get involved, that I think we have to trust somehow, if that makes sense. Yeah. When we try to go for the answers too quickly, I think it's really tough. But but getting involved seems to be incredibly important. And somehow showing up as well seems to be really important. How does that sound, Blair?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. I think it's that, I think it's that when we make ourselves available to our heart, when we make ourselves available to love, and we make ourselves available to something greater than our own psychology, it will help us in the conversations. Whatever that force is, it will help us in the conversations. And it will also help us in the conversation. It will help us afterwards in the conversations that didn't go so well. But I think there's because we need some resilience for this conversation for sure. But I think I just get this feeling like we all know deep down we're not operating at a level of intelligence that we could. in this world. But I think that level of intelligence does want to operate here. And we're somehow, each of us, finding a way to make ourselves available to that level of intelligence and bring it down and bring it through into the conversations.
Yes, thank you for that.
Yeah, well, thank you. I really appreciate you just speaking into the group, you know. And it's a big deal to get involved in a conversation without having answers. It's a big deal. I think it is one of the reasons why people do stay silent, is because we feel we need to have the answers before the conversation begins, or we need to have the answers in order to get into, to have a ticket into the conversation. But how can we have the answers if we're not, we've just got to get in the conversation.
And stay there, stay in it.
Yeah, just keep staying there.
Yeah.
Yeah. What you said right up front, Marta Shea, about the silence, you know, do you have that quote to hand again about, I think it was Martin Luther King, that if we stay silent?
Oh yeah, so it says our life begins to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Indeed.
Anybody else, please, like to say something at this point?
We do have two people who have their hands raised, Deborah and Kristen. So I'm not sure if either of them would like to speak.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, let's go with them. Deborah, I see Deborah's hand. Go for it, Deborah.
Thank you both so much for hosting this event for us. This is a wonderful program. I just wanted to share, in 2015, I was ordained at One Spirit Interfaith Seminary in New York City. And I think the best thing that happened to me in that 2-year program was, all growing up in my life, I had the image of God that you had shared earlier, an older white gentleman in the sky. And Jesus was just, you know, somebody important, but it was mostly around God and making God happy. And at the end of seminary, the idea of what God would look like was completely gone. You know, God is in the blade of grass now, but became very, felt very close to Jesus, and the work of being an activist has really stuck with me. And that's one of the reasons I'm here, and it directs a lot of the work that I do. Being out in the world, just walking with regular folks, living our simple, normal lives, but always being there, making God, making spirit apparent, and just the day-to-day of it all. And so for me, that was huge. And it is troubling. You do feel badly for so many people that see a God as punitive and someone that's very difficult to make happy. And it's not how I feel anymore. And so now I walk, and I like to think of Jesus as my friend, and we just kind of do things together. And hopefully I can take that into the work that's still ahead for me and others for many years to come. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Deborah. Yeah, and I have to just say, I love the work of One Spirit. I mean, I think One Spirit has been so inspiring and so helpful to me in so many ways over the years. It's a wonderful interfaith organization, and it's completely influenced me and helped, you know, it actually inspired me to help set up an interfaith seminary in the UK back in the mid-90s. And we got a group of interfaith leaders together for our first meeting, or we nearly did, except they couldn't agree which church to meet in. And so that was a bit of a problem. But that highlighted the problem. And you see, it's another example. This has got nothing to do with color of skin, but this was all to do with othering. This was to do with hierarchies. This was to do with superiority. Yeah, I mean, it's the same psychology, isn't it? And it's a God up there that we're trying to please, and like we're trying to be the most spiritual people on the planet, and like less evolved from nature and more descended from God, perhaps, and it just goes on and on, doesn't it? Yeah, it just goes on and on. But it's amazing. I just want to say how wonderful you're here, and you represent You and One Spirit is a beautiful, wonderful organization.
Thank you.
Deborah, I wanted to thank you also because I follow One Spirit, believe it or not. I am Patrick Saint-Jean. I'm a Jesuit who is here in Creighton University. I really wanted to, really like words really are not enough to thank both of you guys, because you really helped me to rethink about like Vincent Hardin, who walked and really like with Martin Luther King. He was in like Colorado for a long time, but the major like questions he bring again and again: how can America be possible if we today we cannot engage in such kind of like questions of like race relations today? It seems like we've been living, as you said, to continue to say that we are still living today in undeveloped nations and people who are still seeking for a sense of like civilization, because we do not know how to translate the sense of like otherness. And to which, and somehow, as Marta Shea mentioned earlier, I believed, I think some things we stay behind as a defense mechanisms just to project ourselves, which in fact would lead by fear. I'm wondering like if you both of you can like unwrap this concept even much more, how this sense of like will reaction from us as human is also an element of fear that we want to stay behind so that we are not coming to build and be the person that we ought to be in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. What a question. Robert, you want to go ahead? Thank you for that.
You go first, Marta Shea.
I will. I'll go first. So, Patrick, thank you. Here's my humble way of looking at this, and I'm going to stay in the psychology and neuroscience here. Because just like Einstein says, there is that optical delusion, whereas we experience ourselves, experience our feelings, our thoughts as totally separate from the rest, then we find that because we're no longer the same, then we find that there is that other, and that other, which is different to me, I cannot make sense of that, then I need to do something about it. Then I need to start attacking. That's projection. Now in my head. So those that attack thought gets projected. And the more when I attack, then what happens is that I actually think that, hey, I need to now defend myself more because I am attacking. And then it becomes a whole cycle. In neurology, we have a number of syndromes, like Capgras syndrome is one of them. Actually, Carla is here as a physician, very well familiar with this, where I may no longer recognize, for example, after a stroke, part of me, right? So again, in there. And when that happens, not only I don't use it, but sometimes I even become to develop an adverse reaction towards that. So that's the same idea, right? The idea of I may behave that way towards a part of my body, it makes total sense and neurologically that I can do that towards Julia, for example, just because I think we're really totally different. And no, that's not there. But at the same time, because I start to see, not only see her differently, I need to do something. I also am that definitely that there's the fear that come along of, oh, maybe he or she can also do something. And I need to make sure now I do whatever it takes to get stronger, to go stronger. And that's how the explanation of all those associated beliefs come with. So that sense of superiority, that sense of hierarchical ranking, that otherness, and so on and so forth. So it's all really all related. To add, one way I look at that, Patrick, is fear, while fear itself being an organic state that may be a little bit more complex than what we're talking about here, but at least it's really one associated belief. As long as one of them is here, it's going to persist. And the question is, how do we really get there to solve this? Going back to Einstein, we cannot solve our problems with the same type of thinking that started it, that created it. What does that mean? To me, it's that shift of mind. So we need to go beyond our psychology. That is, in my humble opinion, the only solution to this. Going beyond our psychology. Now, we all know that our brain being the command center for the body, but there is a mechanism behind the brain. And that mechanism behind the brain, many experts talk about them differently, but it's the same way we talk about the laws of physics. So we have that mechanism, that system behind the brain that we all share. And when we go there, we go beyond our psychology, then we know that there is not that separation. So we go beyond that delusion. And that's the only way we can bypass that. So as long as we remain with the same type of mind, the same type of thinking, the same type of psychology that created our problem, like Einstein says, we're gonna continue to do that. So the remedy is going beyond it. Going beyond it, where we're gonna be able to look at what Carl Jung talked about, right? That universal mind, that system that really we all know about. I would say that is the solution. So you may want to add something to that, Robert. So that would be my answer to that, Patrick.
Thank you
I
so
don't think
much.
good. No, thank you. And
Yeah,
Karen, go ahead, Robert. Sorry.
no, I wasn't going to add anything. I just wondered if Patrick wanted to respond to what you said. I'd be keen to hear. Just how did that sound? I don't know, Patrick, if you'd like to say a bit more. How did that sound from Marta Shea?
Yes, I think Mauro should try to bring it home to a certain degree, because my element, like, is what is the maybe like psychophysiological, if you will, as you lean it toward the neurological aspect of this element that bring the activation of this fear, because the fear in itself is the way to react on internal like fear and somehow that we're not in touch with, and where that's where everything just like started. And how do we get there?
Yeah, again, Patrick, is again in the psychology. So we have the normal blueprint, which is our genetics, our experience and environment, and then we have the process of epigenetics. All this is based on our past. That's why we talk about transgenerational trauma and all that. We carry that with us, which means we carry that whole blueprint that is our psychology. But again, thankfully, wow, or otherwise it would really be doomed. Behind that blueprint, we have our natural blueprint that natural blueprint. Here's an example. Studies show that MIT graduates in physics do poorly compared to children in physics exams. Listen to this. That's one example. Listen to this. MIT graduate from physics in many physics questions. Here's another example on that those same studies. Children, before they go to school, they actually do better in questions related to electromagnetism, which is one of the three really absolute law of physics. Then after they went to school. In other words, after they went to school, they get socialized and now they become learned. They forget that they cannot do as well. And now the question is, what's the answer to that? Well, it's really simple. Sigmund Freud himself and his teacher, who was a neuroscientist, Joseph Bloor, talked about the preconscious mind. So the preconscious mind is that's where reality testing is. This is where it is, reality testing. So when we become socialized, when we become programmed into fear, into this is him, this is her. No, look, it doesn't look like me. No, we better really run away from them. And we running onto our unconsciously. So consciously we take that in, and then our unconscious mind just runs it for us automatically. And we now are operating from there, bypassing the preconscious mind where reality testing is. That's what Einstein meant by we cannot solve the problems with the same mind or the same thinking that created it. We need to make a shift. In the preconscious mind, that's reality testing. That's Einstein's imagination. That's reality. That's knowing without knowing. How did you know that? I don't know. I just know. That's what Robert meant by Martin Luther King Jr. was led. It's nothing magical. It's total neurological. It is there. That's what that means when in Selma, he decided to just kneel down and he said, let's just go back. And many people say, how did you do that? No, he knew something. Preconscious mind. The good thing is it's still here in our brain. It's just a shift. The moment we make that shift, fear will no longer be the driving force for any of one of us. And all those types of beliefs will be able to be resolved.
You get me there. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Great question.
Amen. Yeah, I just want a clip of that conversation between you two. That'll do me for the program. That was amazing. Thank you both. I love that. Great question, great conversation, great listening. Loved it. Thank you. I got just, goodness me, goosebumps all over.
We are very humble, Robert. He's the family.
Patrick,
Well, thank you.
Patrick is a scholar. He's a very humble, just like you, Robert. Patrick is a scholar, Jesuit, professor of psychoanalysis and many other things in several universities here in the United States. And we're very humbled to have you here, Patrick. And thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Should we take another one?
Yeah, so Kristen has her hand up. She's Kristen, are you with us? I
am.
Okay, great.
Can you hear me? I can't undo my video, but so you all have just blown me out of the water with all this wonderful, rich conversation. So I may say something completely different than I thought I would say, but we're talking about our informed thoughts and where they came from too. So that's probably appropriate. I just have to go back to Blair and recognize that need to keep studying and learning more. And what I had mentioned in the chat is to how I struggle with the idea of the oneness and fragmentation and reconciling the fragmented parts So a lot of what I've been looking into is collective trauma, and education on race and racism, but my own biases, and trying to get over the fact that I think I am this social worker who has fought for rights of, not just the people in front of me and my patients, but doing advocacy for, immigrants at the border. But, what are my own ugly parts? And then I remembered that the title of this section was Under the Skin, and really, how do we just kind of resolve all of this within ourselves in order to, I mean, if we can't do that, how looking at the country today, how are we going to fix this? Because I'm a fixer. So so you can tell I'm really all over the map on this, but I've been studying since quarantine started because I couldn't do other stuff. So that's where I'm at, especially yesterday. Where do we go from here? That's my main question.
And Kristen, I feel, but I want to ask you as well. What I'm going to give your question back to you.
Okay.
Where where do we go from here? What are you, like I said to Blair, we're feeling into the answers, so you don't need this to be, I don't need this to be your definitive answer by any means, but as an exploration, as an inquiry, where are you getting the feeling to go with this? What do you think we need to know?
Well, where I live is very rural. A lot of people who would not come to a conversation like this. And so I try to approach everyone as genuinely as possible. We're not going to get anywhere if we just cancel everybody else, right? Even though that's the impulse right now would be, we're going to cut this stuff out of our lives, but you can't cut out the society that you live in. So how do we improve it? And I'm starting with myself, not just studying about racism as if it's something that doesn't exist within me. So sitting down and saying, okay, you have had these beliefs, you have not acted when you could have, or you acted incorrectly when you tried to do something, all of these things where there are missteps along the way because I haven't been as informed as I should have been, even though, a social worker, we have to take cultural competency every year, but competency is one thing, mastery or understanding is totally different, right? So.
Yeah.
Add to Robert's answer, Christine, thank you for a really wonderful question. I would say that the exercise we're gonna have very soon now about the unconscious bias, and then which will follow by an inquiry. What do you think is your place, your contribution to undoing racism? That may be very helpful in really helping not just you, but all of us answer this wonderful question that you have. Right?
Yeah,
Because,
thank you.
yeah, you're very welcome. Because again, if it was as easy, then we would have not been where we are right now. However, the formula is there. It's that 55 minutes, 55 minutes that Robert says, right? That Einstein says to understand, and those 5 minutes to do it, and it takes inquiry. It takes to be on that conversation, to be willing to stay on that conversation, and we will get there. So I think this may be a good segue, Robert. I don't know how you feel about that. to
Yeah.
speak about unconscious biases and then invite and then take it from there. Unfortunately, we may not be able to take additional questions for now, but thank you everybody who are willing to really contribute. And
Yeah.
we'll have additional chances at least in part 3 to do that. Robert?
Thank you. Yeah. And lots more, because also I think that, you know, these contributions are just so, you know, just to know we're not in the conversation alone is such a great thing. And you know, just the sort of the strength we gather from one another, I think is really great. You know, just knowing that you don't have to have the answers to be in the conversation. It's more that to be in the conversation will hopefully create the answers. That's what this is about. But yeah, we wanted to address unconscious bias. And I suppose, you know, it's again, bias, if we just get a feeling for bias for a minute, bias must happen. I mean, there's not really a way around it. You know, there is going to be a bias because of the way the world is set up and the way things are set up. Again, bias comes from, quite honestly, from that sense of separation. The moment we feel separate, we're going to be identified and we're going to have a bias. We can't help it. And we have to address that. Now, I'm starting there because bias, you know, it's very easy. I call it like the unholy trinity, okay, in my mind. The unholy trinity is fear, judgment, and shame. So this is the unholy trinity: fear, judgment, and shame. I'm afraid I'm biased. I'm going to be totally ashamed that I'm biased. I'm going to judge the hell out of me for being biased. So I'm hardly going to stay in a conversation around bias if I'm going to throw the unholy trinity at me of fear, judgment, and shame. So I've got to sort of start with some acceptance. I've got to just start with, actually, look, you know, it's not about not having a bias. It's about acknowledging that there is a bias and then finding a way to meet that bias with a bigger mind, a bigger heart, you know, and a bigger sense of spirit. So, like, just as a simple example in bias, in my family, my daughter, Bo, is left-handed. And when I watch the world through Bo's eyes, I discover all sorts of biases, you know, which actually make it really, really tricky and difficult if you're left-handed. Yeah. And I'd never thought about that before. So right there, you know, I've just been under the impression that, you know, right-handedness is the way it is for everybody. And it's not true. Yeah, it's completely not true. Yeah. So there's a bias. I've watched my daughter and my son growing up, and I see right there just the differences between a boy growing up and a girl growing up, and the way they encounter the world, and just all of the biases that happen there. I grew up in a little village called Littleton. It was really, really little. And, you know, there was no diversity that was particularly obvious in my village, you know. But there's so many biases that just start with this little life of ours. And it seems that, and this is the thing I want to just speak into this group. I think what we're really looking at is the difference between psychology and love. In any given moment, we could ask ourselves, am I thinking or am I loving? Am I thinking or am I loving? And if we're going to address bias, it's a journey, I think, it's a journey of love. And what we're doing is we're trying to widen our circle of love so that we acknowledge that we're all biased, but we don't want those biases to remain in such a way that they separate us out from each other. Yeah. And so, for example, Deborah, I was very moved by what you were saying, for example, about, you know, your relationship with, firstly, God, you know, the white guy in the sky. You know, what a relief it was to see sort of Samuel Jackson show up as God. by the way, you know, in the movie. That was nice. What a relief it is to think of in the Christian mystics how often God is referred to as the mother. For a moment, you know, let's pop that in for a moment, and just, you know, just to sort of get past these biases is a really cool thing. And one of the things that I did, by the way, when I was starting to sort of get into this work, I wonder, actually, can I have a screen share option there, Karen? I found it incredibly helpful when I was starting to get into spirituality. I started actually collecting pictures of Jesus. Yeah. And I started, I wanted to know, what would it be like to be a Maori, yeah, and believe in Jesus? What would it be like to be a Rastafarian and believe in Jesus? And I got to tell you, like, I have to say, I mean, initially it shook me. It shook me because I honestly thought like Jesus was from England. I just thought, well, Jesus must have been like born down the road from me. Yeah. And he probably spoke in an English accent. And surely the Bible was written in English, wasn't it? You know, I mean, you know, but that's where I began. That's how it was. I had no idea about Greek. I had no idea about Aramaic. You know, I had to learn about that. Nobody told me about that stuff. Yeah. So I had to like, if I was going to get to know the truth about, in this occasion, Jesus, it was to sort of like, you know, get past some biases there that were like preset in my thinking. Yeah. I mean, even like when I started to look at the word love, I was writing a book on love, and I took a moment just to try to absorb the fact that there are 6,900 languages on our planet. 6,900 languages, and they've all got different words for love. Yeah, just trying to take that in for a moment, you know, that like love isn't a word. And actually, if I'm going to really experience love, I've got to get past my own bias around what that word even means. Yeah. If I'm going to really experience what love is. Yeah. If I think of just one other instance, for several years, I worked on the team with a brand called Dove. It's a soap brand, Dove and the Real Beauty campaign. And I was the coach to 3 of the presidents of Dove, actually. But our work was really about undoing our biases around what beauty is and actually widening our appreciation for what beauty is. Yeah. And it was thrilling, actually, absolutely thrilling to be released from the prison of my conditioning, from my biases, and to be able to sort of see beauty everywhere all of a sudden, you know, in all different shapes and sizes and colors and everything. It was, and again, it became clear that beauty actually is in many ways a social construct. And that actually beyond that, you know, beyond the biases, there's a whole other experience of beauty that waits for us, you know. So we wanted just to acknowledge, you know, that there will always be bias and that our psychology is governed to a large degree by our sociology. We haven't learned to think for ourselves. We didn't learn to think for ourselves. Our thinking is governed by psychology. Wherever you were raised and your thinking was influenced by the sociology of your family. It's the sociology of your village. Yeah, the sociology of your ancestors. Yeah, that is where that is what your psychology is influenced by. And within that, there are all sorts of presets and biases, and our work is to be able to meet those biases with enough love that we can genuinely learn to think, maybe properly think, like think for the first time ever from a whole other mind. So one of the things we really wanted to do was address this, and as a group, it was to take a test together. And Marta Shea, I wonder if you'd like to say a bit more about that.
Many of you may or not be familiar with the implicit bias test. So there is the Harvard implicit test. Even if you are, you will, and if you are, you will know that this is not a test you take just once, right? You really go back and take it again. But we would like to see how many of you are familiar with the implicit by Harvard implicit test, right? So like we have a few of you are, and then we think that now I think we have only like 11 minutes. Robert, we have 11 minutes. So we were thinking in this case, given the time, we wonder whether what we might do, Robert, is the following. See what you think. Number one, everyone will receive the actual link to the test. And because you have done such a great, really a genius way of introducing that, and everybody will go and take the test during the week. And then when we come back next Thursday, we'll really open up. We can even start there, open up to really get people to share with everybody what's been like for them. And I can assure you that you will be surprised. I'm always surprised, and then that's been the case for really all of us. I'm sure for Robert as well.
Yeah, and the encouragement will be just to this. I hope you feel like we want this to be a safe place. So, you know, it's like it's as we well, I'm going to speak personally. When I approach a bias test, I start to like really get dressed for it properly. Do you know what I mean? Like wear the right outfit and make sure like I'm going to put on my right mind, you know, and I'm going to really do this test well. And like, you know, in a way it's like, let's relax and let's be surprised by what we experience. Because what we're generating ultimately isn't a right answer or a wrong answer in this test. What we're trying to do is gather the material for what we can confront. So the emphasis will be our, you know, watch out for that unholy trinity of fear, judgment, and shame. And just for a while, we'll park that and we'll just say, let's do this in the spirit of honesty, because the more honest we are, then the more, you know, we can make some progress with this for sure.
So there was a great question here, which subset? So we really would like you to do the race subset. Race. Take it on race. Start if you were to so take it on race for a variety of reasons. Now, once you do that, we would invite you to really go on. Go on. There are about at least 14 subsets. It would be nice for you to really just go and see how you're doing on religion. So like Robert talked earlier about really his relationship with Jesus and the Bible. See what it's like for you. What do you think, Robert? So maybe race might be a good thing, and then and then bring. So please, as Robert says, really feel that we are part of a place that is serious about moving on the conversation and taking into consideration how it's very tricky to get into that great concept that Robert, I'm learning this for the first time. Thank you for that whole Trinity, that unholy Trinity. I love it. I love it. That judgment and shame and fear. Thank you for that. So make sure that you don't get into that trap. I like it. I'm gonna pick it. Yeah. So skin color and race. Right.
So we'll set up that we'll set up that test with Karen's help. Thank you. And it'd be great to send that out. For sure.
And Robert, with the 7 minutes we have left, I wonder whether we may also maybe introduce some inquiries also for the week that will go along with the bias test, the implicit test that everybody will be taking.
Yes, for sure. If you can hear lots of popping going on from my microphone, it's because tonight is fireworks night in England.
Yeah.
Which is a very strange custom that we have. in England. It's every year we set off fireworks to commemorate and celebrate the attempt of somebody to blow up the Houses of Parliament several hundred years ago. So this is why you'll hear lots and lots of fireworks right now outside my window. Look, I think the most important thing, I think, as well, is for us to get a feeling for, you know, how I want to show up in this conversation in my life. Really. We won't always have the answers, for sure, but it's the way we show up in the conversation, I think, that matters the most. Because, and if we can show up in a way where we acknowledge we have biases and we are willing to listen and learn and love, and I think those are my 3 L's: listening, learning, and loving. You know, it's a cool it's a really cool thing. There's a line in A Course in Miracles, which is a book that I'm very inspired by. It's actually a question. The question is, do you want to be right or happy? And, you know, I spend a lot of my life wanting to be right, mostly from a place of insecurity. I just wanted to feel like a grown up and to feel right, you know. But along the way, I have to say, I would much prefer to be happy than to be right. And I think that, you know, we've got to find a new way to get involved in conversations on this planet where we're less opposed to each other, less in positions, and more open. And in psychology, there is this thing, it's sometimes referred to as the law of 3. And the law of 3 is another type of thinking. It's the 3rd position. It's the position which isn't between me and the other, as Marta Shea was mentioning, me and the other. That's duality. Yeah, that's binary duality. That's opposites. And we see this played out in religion. We see this played out in politics. It's just a binary way of thinking. And what we're looking for is this other way, which is that when 2 or more are gathered, there is this other force. When 2 or more are gathered, there is this other force. And what we're trying to do is find a way to stay really, really open to the capacity to be guided in a conversation. So we're listening, we're learning, and we're loving. And through the conversation, it's helping us to evolve somehow. So, you know, my encouragement as we close today is I think, just to say, look, allow this conversation to settle and see if we can let what we're doing here somehow influence all of our other conversations in life, so that we're showing up in a way in our conversations that are a little bit more open, softer, and we're more available to having a genuine interaction rather than a debate.
Yeah.
How about you, Marta Shea? What's a closing thought from you?
Totally. Thank you for that. I totally agree with this taking the test itself is part of that staying in the conversation, isn't it? And then asking the question in the inquiry of how am I showing up even while taking that test, right?
Yeah.
And then after that, and then what kind of conversation we have in our head about the result is very important, because allowing ourselves also to be exposed to our own beliefs that none of us are exempt of, because again, it started at one place for all of us. So we really very important. And number 2, we actually may, as after we meet Robert, we may decide to send one more or 2 more inquiries for everyone as
Lovely.
well.
Yeah.
By the time they receive the email, but so we can add.
Yeah.
And then we look forward to having you next week. We thank you very much for being part of this conversation, for staying in this conversation, for really being open. We've to really look at that possibility thinking that Robert mentioned, And I would like to acknowledge Alison and Daring who wanted to talk, but we didn't really have the time. We hope we'll be able to give to see whether they can get the opportunity to talk. And maybe I could close with that same line of Martin Luther King. Our life, our life, our life begins to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. So we thank you very much, and we send you love, which is really totally different from what separation is. Look forward to seeing you again next week. Take care.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Look forward. Have a beautiful week, and we look forward to a wonderful part 3.